Most people think that being kind, patient, and understanding is the right way to handle a narcissist. What they don't realize is that niceness is the very thing the narcissist is counting on. And what actually changes the dynamic has nothing to do with being nice at all. There is a fundamental misunderstanding that most people carry into interactions with narcissistic personalities, one that feels entirely reasonable from the outside and proves consistently costly from the inside. It is the belief that if you are patient enough, understanding enough, forgiving enough, the person in front of you will eventually recognize your goodwill and respond in kind. That decency consistently offered will eventually produce decency in return. What most people don't realize is that inside the narcissist relational world, this is not how niceness is processed. It is not received as a gesture of genuine human connection. It is not experienced as something that creates a relational debt requiring reciprocation. It is received as information, specifically as information about how much can be extracted from this particular person before consequences arrive. This is the supply function of niceness. Every accommodation that goes unreciprocated teaches the narcissist something about the available margin. Every act of patience that follows a boundary violation communicates that violations are tolerable. Every instance of forgiveness offered before genuine accountability has occurred signals that accountability is optional in this relationship. None of this is consciously processed, but it shapes behavior with the reliability of any consistent feedback signal. Pay attention to what this reveals about the progressive nature of narcissistic boundary violations. They rarely begin dramatically. They begin at the edges, small tests, minor overreaches, moments that could plausibly be attributed to carelessness rather than intent. And what determines whether they remain at the edges is not the narcissist's character. It is the response they receive. This is where the kindness calibration becomes visible. The narcissist's behavior is not fixed. It is continuously adjusted based on environmental feedback. And niceness, consistently offered without consequence, is the clearest feedback signal available. It communicates that the current level of behavior is acceptable. And acceptable, in the narcissist's internal calculus, simply means the baseline from which the next escalation begins. There is a specific quality that narcissists identify, often within the earliest interactions, that determines how they will approach a particular person over time. It is not intelligence. It is not social status. It is not even the obvious markers of vulnerability that most people assume make someone a target. It is empathy, specifically the visible behavioral expression of empathy, the tendency to prioritize another person's emotional comfort, to extend understanding before it has been earned, to absorb difficulty without complaint, and to return warmth even when warmth has not been offered. What most people don't realize is that these qualities, which represent genuine human strengths in most relational contexts, function as a detection signal inside the narcissist targeting system. A person who leads with empathy is communicating something specific, that they will work to understand before they judge, that they will extend benefit of the doubt generously, and that the maintenance of relational harmony matters enough to them that they will often absorb discomfort, rather than create conflict by naming it. This is exactly what they want you to believe is being appreciated. The hidden reason behind the narcissist's initial warmth toward empathetic people is not recognition of a kindred spirit. It is the identification of a favorable operating environment, one in which the usual costs of their behavior are likely to be absorbed rather than enforced. Pay attention to what shifts the dynamic more effectively than any amount of empathy ever could. Calm, consistent accountability, the quiet, emotionally unescalated practice of naming what happened, identifying its impact, and applying a consequence, without drama, without excessive explanation, and without the implicit offer of immediate forgiveness, reaches a place that empathy never touches. Most people miss this because accountability without emotional charge doesn't feel like a powerful response. It feels almost too simple. The hidden reason it works is that the narcissist's entire system is calibrated to exploit emotional responses, warmth, guilt, anxiety, defensiveness. Calm accountability produces none of these. It produces something the narcissist's tactical system has no reliable counter for: a clear consequence delivered without invitation to negotiate. There is a quality of interaction that consistently disrupts the narcissist's tactical system more effectively than either warmth or hostility. And it is one that most people never consider deploying because it feels, from the inside, almost uncomfortably impersonal. Neutrality, not coldness, not performed indifference, not the barely contained hostility that sometimes masquerades as calm in interactions with people who have caused significant harm, but genuine, factual, emotionally unloaded neutrality, the kind that responds to provocations with observations rather than reactions, that answers manipulation attempts with simple statements of fact, that meets emotional escalation with a measured evenness that neither rises to meet the temperature nor visibly suppresses the response. What most people don't realize is that the narcissist's tactical advantage in every interaction depends on emotional data. The warmth that signals openness, the guilt that signals susceptibility, the defensiveness that signals a pressure point worth applying more pressure to. All of it provides the narcissist with the real-time feedback their system requires to calibrate the next move. Remove the emotional data, and the system loses its navigational input. This is where the neutral response strategy becomes the most functionally disruptive approach available, because neutrality doesn't give the narcissist system anything to work with. It produces no exploitable warmth, no manageable guilt, no revealing defensiveness. It simply presents facts. What happened? What was said? What will occur as a result? In a register so free of emotional charge that the usual response calibration cannot find purchase. Pay attention to how the narcissist responds to sustained neutrality, because the response is revealing. The provocations escalate. The emotional temperature of their own behavior rises in proportion to the evenness they encounter. They are attempting, with increasing urgency, to produce a reaction that confirms the emotional engagement they depend on is still present beneath the surface. This is where the boundary, without explanation, completes what neutrality begins. Most people, when establishing a boundary with a narcissist, explain it. They provide reasoning, context, emotional justification, a full account of why the limit exists and what it means to them. The hidden reason this consistently fails is structural. Every explanation is an argument waiting to be dismantled. Every justification is an invitation to find the counter, justification that makes the boundary negotiable. The narcissist doesn't need to overcome the boundary directly. They simply need to find the thread in the explanation that, when pulled, makes the boundary feel less certain than it appeared. A boundary stated without explanation provides no thread to pull. It simply exists as a fact about the interaction rather than a position to be debated. Most people miss this because explanation feels like respect, and the desire to be respectful in how limits are communicated is entirely understandable. But the hidden reason explanation backfires is that it communicates something the narcissist immediately identifies as an opening, that the boundary is still under negotiation. There is a behavioral pattern that emerges in sustained interactions with narcissistic personalities that most people only fully recognize in retrospect, when enough distance exists to compare what was said, what was promised, and what was actually done across a sufficient span of time. And what that comparison consistently reveals is a gap so systematic, so reliably present, and so specifically organized around the narcissist's interests that it cannot be attributed to ordinary forgetfulness or miscommunication. The record was being rewritten continuously, selectively, and in real time. What most people don't realize is that gaslighting, the gradual revision of shared reality to serve the narcissist's current narrative needs, is not a dramatic or obvious process. It happens in the smallest increments, a conversation recalled differently than it occurred, a commitment that apparently was never made in the form you understood it, a pattern of behavior you identified that somehow, in the narcissist's account, never existed or was entirely provoked by something you did. Over time, without a reliable external reference point, these revisions accumulate into something genuinely disorienting, a chronic uncertainty about your own memory, your own perception, and your own account of events that the narcissist exploits with remarkable efficiency. This is where documentation behavior becomes not a strategy, but a structural necessity. Quietly maintaining an accurate record of what was actually said and done, not as a weapon, not as preparation for confrontation, but as a private anchor to objective reality, creates a reference point that the narcissist's narrative revision cannot reach. Pay attention to what this does to the gaslighting mechanism, because gaslighting depends on the target's uncertainty. The moment an accurate record exists, and the target knows it exists, the internal experience of doubt that the gaslighting was producing begins to lose its grip. The consistency signal operates alongside this, and it may be the single most important behavioral principle in any ongoing interaction with a narcissistic personality. Narcissists test continuously, systematically, and with a patience most people never attribute to them. Most people miss this warning sign because individual tests seem minor. A small boundary pushed once seems forgivable. A limit tested occasionally seems manageable. But the hidden reason consistent enforcement matters is that the narcissist is not evaluating individual incidents. They are evaluating the pattern, and the pattern tells them everything they need to know about which limits are real and which are simply statements that will eventually give way under sufficient pressure. Consistent enforcement, the same response, applied with the same calm every single time, communicates something that no single reaction ever could. That this particular limit is not a negotiating position. There is an approach to managing ongoing interactions with narcissistic personalities that operates so quietly, so gradually, and so entirely without drama that most people never recognize it as an approach at all. It doesn't involve confrontation. It doesn't require a declared boundary or an announced withdrawal or any of the visible behavioral signals that the narcissist system is calibrated to detect and respond to. It simply involves becoming less available, incrementally, consistently, and without explanation. What most people don't realize is that the narcissist supply extraction depends not just on the quality of the engagement they receive, but on its volume and frequency. Regular access to a person's emotional responses, reactions, and psychological attention creates a supply environment that sustains the narcissist's behavioral patterns at their current level. Reduce that access quietly, without announcement, without the kind of dramatic withdrawal that signals emotional investment in the reduction itself. And the supply environment changes in ways the narcissist cannot easily address through their usual tactics. Strategic disengagement doesn't give the narcissist a reaction to exploit. It doesn't provide a declared position to argue against. It simply produces, gradually and undeniably, a diminishing availability that the narcissist system experiences as a slow environmental shift rather than a specific provocation they can target. Pay attention to what this does over time, because the behavioral response to gradual disengagement is different from the response to dramatic withdrawal. Dramatic withdrawal gets pursued aggressively because it signals emotional investment in the distance. Gradual disengagement produces confusion. The narcissist system keeps searching for the reaction that will tell them what is happening and keeps finding less and less to work with. This is where pattern recognition completes everything else. Because every tactic discussed in this video, the neutrality, the unexplained boundaries, the consistent enforcement, The documentation, the strategic disengagement, produces its maximum effect the moment the narcissist realizes something has fundamentally changed. Most people miss this warning sign because it requires seeing the full sequence rather than individual moments. The hidden reason pattern recognition disrupts the narcissist so profoundly is that their entire system depends on the target experiencing each manipulation as an isolated incident, a one-time misunderstanding, a specific conflict, a particular difficult moment, rather than as one instance of a behavior that has been repeating in the same structure since the beginning. The moment someone demonstrates, through their behavior rather than their words, that they can see the whole pattern, that each individual tactic is being recognized as part of a sequence rather than encountered as a surprise, the narcissist loses the element their system depends on most. The advantage of being the only one in the interaction who knows what is actually happening. When you examine the complete picture, niceness functioning as supply, kindness calibrating the margin for escalation, empathy signaling a favorable operating environment, accountability dismantling the exploitation mechanism, neutrality removing the emotional data. The narcissist navigates by unexplained boundaries, eliminating the negotiation opening, documentation anchoring reality against revision, consistent enforcement, communicating genuine limits, strategic disengagement, reducing the supply environment, and pattern recognition, removing the tactical advantage of being the only informed participant. What emerges is a portrait of a dynamic that was never actually about conflict. It was always about information. The narcissist's behavior across every tactic and every phase was organized around reading your responses and using what they found there to calibrate the next move. Niceness provided the most useful information available that the current level of behavior was tolerable, that consequences were unlikely, and that the available margin for escalation remained open. What most people don't realize is that changing the dynamic doesn't require confrontation, explanation, or the kind of emotional engagement that most people associate with addressing a problem directly. It requires changing the information the narcissist receives from interacting with you, neutrality instead of warmth, consequences instead of forgiveness, consistency instead of variable enforcement, disengagement instead of continuous availability. None of these are dramatic. None of them require a declared position or an emotional confrontation or the kind of visible response that the narcissist system is specifically designed to exploit. They simply change what is available in the environment the narcissist is trying to navigate. Pay attention to what this reveals about where the actual leverage in these dynamics was always located. Not in understanding the narcissist better, not in communicating more clearly, not in finding the right combination of patience and explanation that would finally produce genuine change. In changing what your behavior communicates, because the narcissist was always responding to that signal far more than to anything you ever said.